Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It's going to be a lot of snow out there, and we're really wanting to make sure that our plows are able to be as effective as possible.
Preparing for another big dump. It's all hands on deck across the Lower Mainland.
There's some roads that have been, lost many bridges, and the roads are just no longer there. They just don't exist.
Learning the scope of the damage from BC's catastrophic floods and why it could take years to fix.
We're kind of feeling like we have to make up the rules as we go along.
Hanging by a thread and waiting for more support. How BC businesses are coping with COVID staffing issues.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Well, it's back. More snow is falling across the south coast, and you're being warned to be prepared for closures and delays as another winter storm moves in. Dan Burrett joins us live in the elements with more. And Dan, some are still driving tonight, some will be heading out in the morning. So what can people expect?
Well, there's nothing falling, at least here in downtown Vancouver. We've seen some reports of it already falling in Victoria, but the same as it ever was message. Slow down, be prepared to wait, and be prepared to choose a new route if you have to. The province warning earlier today it may close the Alex Fraser and Port Mann bridges if wind hits along with snow and freezing rain. It says that strong wind can be risky to technicians who deploy that cable collar system on both the bridges. We've already seen closures, at least on the Alex Fraser once before. We've already seen plenty of crashes across Metro Vancouver in the Fraser Valley. It's been slow going on some routes and especially side streets that don't get the attention that the major routes do. Yesterday, TransLink warned of 4-hour-plus waits for some buses after they got trapped by slick streets and hills. It's switching to articulated buses for some of its routes. It's putting de-icer on the lines and running SkyTrain throughout the night. To keep the tracks clean, it asks customers to leave extra time, check the route before they leave, and don't forget your mask once you get on board. And it has a message for drivers, too.
Our buses are as reliable as the roads are clear. So imagine if you're having a tough time driving in your vehicle, imagine how difficult it is for our buses. So we are doing all we can to ensure that we get people from where they need to go safely, such as, switching some of our buses to those 40-foot buses that are a bit more agile.
Okay, so TransLink preparing, and Dan, what are cities doing to deal with the snow and possibly freezing?
Well, the plows, the sanders, and the salters have been out throughout the day, and they're going to be running throughout Metro Vancouver in several cities throughout the evening. Surrey says it will have 45 plows and other pieces of heavy equipment out to keep the roads clear. Much of those pieces of equipment have been running throughout the day, and major routes, they will be the focus once again.
You're dealing with not only the snow, but you're dealing with the traffic on the roads, right? So we always just ask people give the plows room for them to do their job.
And just a few moments ago, Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart tweeted out asking people for a favor. If you don't have to drive tomorrow, please stay off the roads, he asked, so those plowers and salters and sanders can keep the roads and sidewalks clear. Speaking of sidewalks and other things, homeowners, you are responsible for clearing your sidewalks in front of your home and the walks up to your house each day. If you are looking for salt, you may need to improvise with something like cat litter and sand, because we've talked to some hardware stores and they say salt is in very short supply. Anita.
No kidding. I think we all remember the great salt wars of 2016, was it, Dan?
Had to be there, yep.
Thank you. The snow and ice are also causing a spike in vehicle damage. ICBC says calls to its claim service yesterday more than doubled compared to the previous day. 1,100 calls Monday, but more than 2,500 calls came in Tuesday. It's not clear how many daily calls it gets on average, and the insurer notes not all calls represent claims. ICBC reminds drivers to slow down, increase the distance between you and the vehicle in front of you, allow extra travel time, and with freezing temperatures tonight, be careful of black ice. Let's bring in meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe now. And Joe, not much falling yet in the Lower Mainland. Vancouver Island, as Dan mentioned, is getting hit. So what can everyone else expect tonight? Where are we going to see things happen and when?
Yeah, things are going to ramp up in the next couple of hours, Anita. I want to show you the big picture on the satellite and radar. This is a battle between very moist wet air coming almost from the Hawaiian Islands. This is a bit of a mini Pineapple Express colliding with the Arctic air mass we have in place right now. And the battleground is right over the south coast tonight, overnight, and into Thursday morning. So it's going to be tricky trying to figure out exactly when that snow changes over to rain. But one thing's for sure, we will get a lot of snow before that changeover happens. This is a look at the radar right now. The purple is the snow. Starting to see it accumulate from basically Renfrew down through Victoria, Esquimalt, Nanaimo, all starting to get the accumulations. Flakes are beginning to fly in through western sections of Metro Vancouver, but I think we've got another hour or two before this very dry air does become saturated. Oh, I've skipped ahead all the way to the forecast instead of getting you through the snowfall totals. I will get to the 5-day forecast in a minute, but let me get you through those totals. We are talking 20 to 30 centimeters of snow, and we should probably take down that 5-day. I haven't quite tweaked the weekend forecast, but let's focus on the overnight into Thursday story. Things will change over beginning Thursday morning, but during that transition, we will see freezing rain. Again, I will update this 5-day forecast for you board later. Ignore that. It's really that freezing rain on top of the 20 to 30 centimeters of snow that will be a big concern. Coming up, I really want to break down the variety of timing of changeovers. But Anita, one thing that all models agree on, we will be waking up to a lot of snow across Metro Vancouver.
Okay, we've got the shovel and the salt handy, as Dan mentioned. Thanks, Joe.
Yes, you're welcome.
The weather update is brought to you by Sophia Financial Group of Raymond James Limited. Register now for our free Cash Flow Connection series at sophiaevents.ca.
Well, nearly 2 months after catastrophic flooding, the province is finally learning the scope of damage to resource and service roads. And the backcountry routes are critical to the province's forestry sector. And as John Hernandez shows us, some have been washed away entirely and could take years to fix.
It might be cold, but Adrian Gagnon is happy to be back to work.
We were basically laid off for a month.
Much of BC's logging industry was put on hold during the catastrophic atmospheric river event, which not only destroyed highways, but also important logging roads.
We had quite a bit of equipment trapped up in Boston Bar right in the middle of November. We lost quite a bit of road up there. We had to move all our equipment out to come here because our roads were gone.
This road, called the Norris Creek FSR, was shut down for weeks after it was hit with a landslide. Crews raced to clear it and managed to get it back online. A crucial win, as many other roads were wiped out.
It took us about a month just to get a sort of inventory of what roads were open and closed. And there's some roads that have been, lost many bridges, and the roads are just no longer there. They just don't exist.
The Chilliwack Resource District says a quarter of the roads in its logging network are damaged or shut down altogether. It's cut off local mills from their fiber supplies, leaving them scrambling to find alternatives.
They're doing surveys of the roads right now, trying to figure out what the best way to find other tenure and other volume somewhere else that they can go to sort of bridge the gap.
With snow covering much of the ground, the damage could be even worse than expected. Tree planting crews who will take to the roads in a number of weeks fear there will be undiscovered hazards.
So it's incumbent on us to be cautious, looking for the telltale signs that the road may not be able to support us.
The damage is expected to take years to fix, and there's still no estimate of how much it will all cost. But industry experts agree investments should go towards making sure these routes can withstand future climate catastrophes.
The severity and intensity and frequency of these events suggests there's going to be a lot more of this in the future.
People who use these roads for recreation are asked to drive slow and obey any closures. John Hernandez, CBC News, near Chilliwack.
We're now seeing hospitalizations trend upwards following this influx of new COVID-19 cases. Today, 19 more people are in hospital, bringing the total to 317 and jumping by 54% within a week. 83 patients are in intensive care. Now, as far as the vaccination campaign goes, more than 4.4 million eligible people have had their first dose, and the province is ramping up the number of booster shots, with a high of over 36,000 having gotten a third jab yesterday. New cases today are once again more than 3,000, this time slightly less than 3,800, but important to note that not all new infections are logged in BC's daily update. And Prince Rupert is down to 7 firefighters for the entire city of about 12,000 people, as COVID has taken the majority of its responders out of action. Now the fire department is saying they may need to call sick firefighters back into duty if there's an emergency. Yesterday, 2 tested positive, and by evening, 8 more. Now 3 more are awaiting test results. Until crews have recovered, Port Edward's volunteer fire department will help out as needed. And BC health officials issued a statement this afternoon following reports of healthcare workers being harassed at COVID-19 testing centres. Dr. Bonnie Henry, Adrian Dix, and Mike Farnworth say they've received reports of workers being intimidated, threatened, and verbally harassed by some people seeking COVID tests at unspecified sites around the province. It's illegal to impede these services or intimidate healthcare workers. They say threats and aggressive behavior will be reported to police. And we have breaking news to tell you about from the Canucks. Elias Pettersson has been placed into the NHL's COVID protocol. The team making the announcement on Twitter about half an hour ago. The Star Center is the 5th player currently on the protocol list. The Canucks' next game is Saturday when they host the Ottawa Senators. And new details to tell you tonight that have come out of a Vancouver courtroom about a woman accused of posing as a nurse. Crown prosecutors say police are investigating Bridget Claro in connection with more charges, this time for assault. She's currently charged with fraud over $5,000 and personation to gain advantage. The revelation happened during a bail hearing. Claro was on the phone from Ottawa, where she is facing similar charges for faking nursing credentials there. Vancouver police say she posed as a nurse at BC Women's Hospital, where she assisted with surgeries for a year. She has a string of convictions in other provinces and has never been licensed to work as a nurse. Her next court appearance here is February 9th. And police have cut off what they're calling a smuggling operation after seizing more than 100 kilograms of methamphetamine at the Surrey border. Here's a look at the sealed bags that came from a car and the detector dog that helped sniff them out. Canadian Border Security say this happened in October during a routine check at the Pacific Highway crossing in Surrey. They pulled over a driver who then tried to flee by speeding off but didn't get far. The RCMP stopped them and brought them back to the border. There are no details on the solo traveler other than they're facing multiple charges under the Customs Act. And North Shore Rescue has set another record for annual calls, smashing a number that was set just in 2020. The all-volunteer team was called into action 226 times last year. That's a jump of 75 calls compared with the previous record of 151, set only a year earlier. According to North Shore Rescue, COVID is a driving force behind these high numbers for the past 2 years. That's because restrictions on indoor gatherings have people exploring the outdoors. Historic floods also saw crews responding to people trapped by high water. As Mira told us earlier, workplaces are bracing for staffing shortages brought on because of Omicron and illness, and BC schools are no different. This week, backup plans are being made in case large numbers of staff call in sick. The superintendent of the province's largest school district joins me now, Jordan Tinney from Surrey. Thank you for being here.
No worries, happy to be here.
Teachers in Abbotsford are sending home letters and calling parents, surveying them about online learning, saying they need to prepare for that possibility come Monday. Is this something Surrey is preparing for as well, despite Bonnie Henry making it clear classes will be on next week?
I think you mean, are we planning as a school district to go online next week? No, not, and we're not surveying parents in advance. We're planning for the what might be a functional closure, but that would only be if we don't have enough staff to run a school or schools.
Okay, so can you talk about those functional closures? So what happens if suddenly all these people call in sick? How would Surrey go about implementing this?
So what we do is we kind of have what you talk about is sort of what is the trigger event that this happens. And of course, staff, if they're phoning in sick, they don't all do it on the very morning of. So we would work with HR or Human Resources Department around, do they see any potential extremely large absences or unusual absences at a school? And are they seeing as well our inability to backfill? Like, can we have enough substitute teachers or teachers teaching on call or spare board support staff employees to ensure that the school can operate? But if they can't, then what we would have to do is also, we would think about our working with our medical health officer and Fraser Health around, are they seeing any unusual COVID numbers or situations in the community? Because we know what happens in the schools is a mirror of the community. So then we basically would be faced with making this decision around having to go for a functional closure. So we've said that we would make that decision for a 7-day period. And so that day that it starts, we kind of call the inception day, like a day zero. So the whole point would be to communicate out to families and to staff as well that, hey, we're in this situation, we don't have sufficient staff, and that we would be transitioning to moving entirely online for the school. So that's that day zero, and typically students would be in a session that day. We have many instances, as you can imagine, where we do, snow closures or power outages or water mains or whatever. We've done single day closures many times before. But this case now, the next day, students wouldn't be at school, and the school would be making this transition over to online learning. And so teachers would be sending home communications to parents around, here's the materials you'll need. And then the next day, which would be day 2, instruction would actually begin. And then we'd carry that on through the 7 days. And as we do that process as well, then principals will continue to monitor staff absenteeism and illness and make sure that everybody's going to be ready, or that we're ready to return to school and to have the school come back into full session. And then we would transition back. So that's, in a real nutshell, that's what the whole thing looks like.
How likely do you think it is that this is going to happen at, 1, 2, maybe a lot of schools in Surrey?
Yeah, it's the great wild card, right? We simply don't know. I haven't had a chance to look at numbers today or get a sense. I can tell you that the feeling is that there are more people sick than there were before winter break. Do I feel it's likely? I'm hoping that it's very unlikely, but it certainly is wise to plan for it, and we'll just have to see.
And just quickly here, we know that transitioning to online learning isn't easy for every family, and Surrey is a very complex district. How do you manage, families who can't support online learning, whether it be, tech issues or perhaps childcare, those kinds of things?
Yeah, so we've provided technology in the past, and we've supported families. Supported families who need connectivity. They might need machine. We've loaned out numerous machines. We also, I think it's important to note, the school, it's an unfortunate term, functional closure. The school is not going to be closed. There's still going to be people in the building. And if there are unique programs in a school for students who have unique needs and abilities, there is such a range of programs we offer. We might not transition the entire school to being online, but I think this day 0 of a notification, day 1, a transition, and then into day 2, it gives us the time to allow parents, hopefully, to make that smooth transition.
Jordan Tinney is the superintendent of the Surrey School District. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, they turfed the COVID restrictions, boarded a plane, and put on a party, sharing it all on the way on social media. Now the challenge is a group of Quebec travelers is dealing with trying to get home. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Now, 4 years ago, the Toma family arrived on PEI, hoping to build a better life. They were Iraqi refugees sponsored by a group of churches here. Now, as Laura Meter reports, the family is building its own 7-bedroom house on PEI.
Footing, foundation. Yeah.
It's a proud moment for Joseph Toma as he shows off his new home to friends and members of the church who sponsored his family. The Tomas came here from Iraq as refugees, hoping to escape the dangers of their former country and start a new life here.
I'm very excited for the new house with my family, with here. It's good here. My son Odis helped me, and Andre, and another of my friends. It's come help me for work. I'm happy for here, PEI.
His family includes his wife Basma and 4 boys. They were sponsored at first by a group of churches, but they didn't want to accept more help than they needed.
Joseph was working within 3 months of arriving here, Odis shortly after that, and they've built this all on their own work, and it's just amazing what they've done. I can't imagine a bigger success story with a family with refugee sponsorship.
The Tomas bought the land and secured a mortgage on their own. Joseph Toma is taking time off to build the house now, but he usually works for a plumbing company with his oldest son, Otis. Son Andre is away at work and can't be here this day. Everyone in the family has helped make this happen.
It's amazing. I couldn't wait to live here. Enjoy my back view. My dad, I think he's amazing and he's really smart to do all this him, and it is first time for him.
It's kind of better than our old house. Our life is gonna change and it's gonna be better.
The part I do like is my room beside the bathroom, which is I can make a secret hole to go to the hot tub so I can swim every day.
There will be 7 bedrooms. Joseph Toma says he wants to have enough space so his oldest sons will stay as long as possible.
It's a good big house. I need all my son with me, going this side.
They hope to move in by the spring. They say it's overwhelming to think they will have their own home, and they're grateful for all the help that got them to this point. The people who know them say they deserve this, and PEI is lucky to have them. Laura Meter, CBC News, Charlottetown.
Some BC businesses have already been forced to close this year due to the rising number of COVID cases and spread of the Omicron variant. Yesterday, the BC government warned businesses to prepare for having at least a third of their workforce sick. As Mira Baines reports, now there are calls for more financial support for shops that have had to close due to shortages.
Some businesses say there's a lot of anxiety over the spread of Omicron virus through the workforce. Kaylin McNeil owns 5 restaurants on Vancouver Island and employs about 100 people.
But right now it's with COVID and the COVID exposures, it's crazy. Like it's very uncomfortable for us as far as management. But we've got a contingency plan to close one of our stores and move and just consolidate staff where and when we can.
He says smaller restaurants with fewer staff will suffer the most. McNeil points out the BC government should provide more financial help and make rules more clear around who can return to work and when after COVID exposures.
I think they could give more money for businesses that have to close. And I think they need to just give a little bit clearer direction on what we as employers should be doing, because we're kind of feeling like we have to make up the rules as we go along. And that's, adds extra anxiety, which is, not needed.
The BC government says businesses can get guidance from WorkSafe. However, as businesses scramble to make plans, there's no signs there's new money earmarked to help businesses who have to close due to sick staff. Recently announced COVID-19 relief grants are only available to gyms and fitness studios shut down under new government restrictions.
The grants that we have support businesses that are been forced to close because of the restrictions.
The opposition Liberals say that's not fair to small business owners who are now bearing the cost for 5 days paid sick leave for employees.
So there should be a consideration for those businesses, and it's not good enough for the government to simply say, well, look, we know you're ineligible for grant programs that we might have available today, so you're on your own. Go and figure it out.
The Surrey Board of Trade says so far 2 sectors are suffering the most under Omicron.
It's just such a tough time, especially for the gyms, the restaurants. Those are the 2 industry sectors that I'm really hearing from.
Now it's a waiting game to see how long this wave will last and how deep the economic losses will be for businesses dealing with a 5th wave. Mira Baines, CBC News, Victoria.
And in his first appearance of the year, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is urging Canadians to keep their guards up, making a special appeal to anyone who remains unvaccinated.
It's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late to go and get your first dose of vaccine. I can tell you that that frontline health worker who's giving you your first dose of the vaccine, even now in January 2022, will be immensely pleased to be able to give you that first dose of vaccine even today, because they'd much rather be giving you an injection of vaccine than intubating you in an ICU.
Justin Trudeau says the country has the tools it needs to weather the Omicron variant, but Canadians have to do their part to keep everyone safe. And he's announced that the federal government will quadruple its contribution of COVID-19 rapid tests to the provinces and territories this month. A group of traveling influencers from Montreal is now facing an investigation by Transport Canada. A video surfaced of them aboard a Sunwing flight to Mexico, ignoring public health measures, dancing, drinking, and vaping without masks. As Alison Northcott reports, along with facing possible steep fines, they now have to find a new way to get back home.
Partiers drinking, dancing, and vaping captured in videos from a pre-New Year's charter flight to Mexico. The images on social media have prompted attention and outrage after a report in the Journal de Montréal, including from the Prime Minister.
And it's a slap in the face to see people putting themselves, putting their fellow citizens, putting airline workers at risk by being completely irresponsible.
Transport Canada is now investigating. It was a Sunwing flight that took the partiers, including Quebec influencers and reality TV stars, to Cancun, but the airline has now canceled their flight home. In a statement, Sunwing said the passengers' behavior was unruly and contravened several Canadian aviation regulations as well as public health regulations. The airline said it provided conditions for the return flight, but that the group didn't accept them. But some say they did not misbehave. The people in this video say they were on the flight, but that they were not among the rowdy ones. We were part of a group, she says, but we never could have known the flight would degenerate the way it did.
Rules are made for everybody.
This pilot and researcher wonders why the pilot didn't stop the flight.
To remove those passengers and to be able to continue with those one who are respecting the rules and want to do it. And if not, just end the flight over there.
The organizer tweeted that he's taking this seriously. I will take a moment to sit down and rethink everything, especially how I can do things better next time. The travelers could now have a hard time getting back home. Other airlines, Air Transat and Air Canada, say they won't fly them, and the federal transport minister says the passengers could face fines of up to $5,000 for each offense. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
And the world's top-ranked men's tennis player, Novak Djokovic, is being deported from Australia. He was there for a tennis tournament that could have cemented his reputation as one of the greatest players ever. But as Jamie Strachan tells us, his vaccination status led to his expulsion.
That's it. Novak Djokovic still unconquered.
Australia has always been a special place for Novak Djokovic. He's won a remarkable 9 Australian titles. He may not get a chance to win a 10th.
Rules are rules, and there are no special cases.
The #1 men's tennis player in the world, who is apparently unvaccinated, had been granted a medical exemption to enter Australia. But after being held at the Melbourne airport overnight, Officials have canceled his visa and ordered Djokovic to leave the country after the Serbian star failed to provide appropriate evidence to support his exemption.
Clearly that did not pass the standards of proof that were required by the Australian Border Force.
Anger has been brewing over Djokovic's exemption in a country that has been one of the most heavily locked down in the world.
We've all gone out and got our jabs and our boosters, and we have someone that's come from overseas, and all of a sudden he's been exempt and can play, and I think it's an absolute disgrace.
Officials scrambled to assure that Djokovic received no special treatment, that his name wasn't attached to the request for an exemption.
No one will be receiving special treatment because of who they are or what they have achieved professionally.
Compounding matters was Djokovic's refusal to discuss why he received the exemption, something Australian tennis officials implored him to do.
We have been through a very tough period of the past 2 years, and we would appreciate, some answers to that.
All of this is a giant headache for tournament organizers who thought the world's top player would be on the court.
By the numbers, he probably is the greatest player of all time. It's hard to deny that. And obviously, for that reason, the Australian Open would love to have him there.
Tonight, Djokovic is believed to be quarantining at this local hotel. His lawyers are expected to appeal. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
Saturday marks 2 years since a Ukrainian airliner was shot down by Iran, but many of the 176 people on board had ties to this country. As Ashley Burke explains, their families have grown frustrated with Canada's response and have lost faith in the RCMP's role in the investigation.
Broken credit card.
This is all Hamid Ismailian has of his wife and 9-year-old daughter's belongings, retrieved from the debris of Flight PS752.
Riros, OHIP card.
He spent the past 2 years searching for answers and countless hours sharing his testimony, evidence, and messages with RCMP, including tips from people who said they were insiders in Iran.
I was in military service right near the scene.
But he says the RCMP didn't speak to informants outside Canada, so he traveled to Ukraine himself, where he says officials told him the RCMP still hadn't shared his testimony with Ukrainian investigators.
I have had several meetings with the RCMP, and all of them were recorded. So they should have been passed to Ukraine, but they were not.
The RCMP's Commissioner Brenda Lucky conceded to families the pace is slow. In a letter obtained by CBC News, she wrote all information has to be analyzed and assessed for risk before it can be shared with Ukraine's criminal investigation.
The international aspect of this particular case makes this a very complicated case for the RCMP to manage, which ostensibly could take quite a few years.
Complicating the case further, some of the victims' families have reported threats and harassment coming from Iran. CSIS says it may constitute foreign interference.
You need to potentially juxtapose the evidence collected with potential national security investigations.
Victims' families have long called for Ukrainian investigators to come here to Canada to speak to them directly. The RCMP's commissioner this summer promised to help make that happen, but Ukraine's Prosecutor General's office says the pandemic got in the way, and now it's waiting to hear from Canada. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Well, the weather outside is frightful, and it's not just here in Vancouver. As the west of Canada takes on the cold, the plus and minuses of the cold snap next.
The National. Here is Peter Mansbridge.
Good evening. It's touted as the world's largest air-supported dome. But today, Vancouver's BC Place Stadium deflated like a massive kiddie balloon. The structure blew a hole, then sank, all in a matter of minutes. The collapse made jaws drop and a few hearts sink. It also raised one overwhelming question: why? Terry Malevsky reports.
Already it's been a tough winter, with Vancouver being lashed by rain, wind and snow. Now this, the huge inflated roof of BC Place Stadium, the landmark billed as the perfect place for the opening of the 2010 Olympics, has ripped open and gone flat.
You hear this bang, pop, and you see this water on the side just being forced in like a huge waterfall of water and snow just busting in through this hole.
Trevor Holness was inside with a cell phone camera.
The sound of it tearing was like insane. I explained it earlier as like elephants coming through your living room.
It happened as yet more wind and sleet hit the city. Without air pressure, the roof collapsed completely.
I couldn't believe what was happening.
From his apartment nearby, Paul Winskill saw it happen, ran for his camera, and captured the sight of the air inside the stadium rushing out through the gap.
When you've been inside BC Place Stadium, you've looked at the enormity of that building. It's like, how does this happen with the technology of today? Well, it occurred today, and I was a little shocked at how quickly it went down.
What happens really started somewhere around this area with a small hole.
Gerald Romani was another neighbor who caught on his camera the last moments when the roof was still inflated. He says it took only a few minutes for the whole thing to come down.
Actually, now I have a better view with the roof gone.
From the inside, it's a mess. Rain pouring in, crews trying to pump out the water, and the management trying to make it sound not so bad. For one thing, they said no one was hurt. There was no event going on. They said they pumped air in to slow the rate of collapse and called it a controlled deflation.
I do want to emphasize it was one panel, it's repairable, and we do have a panel being flown in at this particular point in time.
Still, this has cast a cloud over Vancouver's plan for an indoor Olympic opening ceremony. Only last year, the provincial government swore the roof was good for another 15 or 20 years. Wrong. Cory Malewski, CBC News, Vancouver.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It's crazy. Like it's very uncomfortable for us as far as the management, but we've got a contingency plan to close one of our stores and move and just consolidate staff where and when we can.
There are calls for more financial support for BC businesses who've had to close because of COVID staff shortages. This comes as schools prepare to resume classes next week with contingency plans in place in case there aren't enough teachers to do in-person learning. And investigators are now looking into a number of potential assault charges involving a woman accused of posing as a nurse for a year while assisting with surgeries at BC Women's Hospital. Police are now gathering evidence related to the assault allegations against Bridget Claro. Right now, she faces 2 charges in Vancouver: fraud over $5,000 and personation to gain advantage. North Shore Rescue has smashed its record for annual calls, 226 rescue calls in 2021. That's compared with just 151 the year before in 2020. Crews say COVID is a big reason for the jump because more people have been exploring the outdoors. And well, it was a snowy holiday season, but winter is just getting started. In fact, snow is falling across BC's south coast tonight, and officials are warning people to be prepared for disruptions. Susanna De Silva walks us through it all.
While the grill is helping to keep Owen Chen warm, a few other things on his food truck are feeling the cold.
My olive oil's a little freezing, but that's not much. And I have to be careful with the water pipes.
And it is usually a scramble to take advantage of brief snow days in Metro Vancouver. Instead, the ground has been white in some places since before Christmas. With temperatures averaging 10 degrees below normal and unfortunately timed snowfalls with another big one on the way.
Getting 10 to 20 centimeters of snow is quite significant given that the Vancouver average for January is about 12 centimeters of snow.
The Fraser Valley could see 30, followed by freezing rain, prolonged conditions that are a challenge to those without a home, with some shelters seeing signs of frostbite.
When it is a day or 2 days or 3 days of cold and snow or sleet, it's more manageable. We're looking at potentially extreme and fatal consequences for our community members who are experiencing homelessness.
While northern BC is also dealing with wind chills of -40, extreme cold that is spread across the country, with warnings in place throughout much of Alberta.
You've had 29 days in a row with below freezing temperatures.
The same goes for Saskatchewan, throughout Manitoba, and into northern Ontario, complicating a difficult situation for one remote First Nation dealing with a major outbreak of COVID.
There's no one there to cut the wood because it's COVID, and the essential workers that usually do this for the First Nation are sick themselves.
There will be some relief, at least in Western Canada, with BC temperatures returning to seasonal next week, and places in Alberta could see a 40-degree jump to just above freezing. Susanna Da Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
And it's already coming down over parts of the south coast, but you may not be relishing digging out from this latest snowstorm. As Janella Hamilton reports, though, the snow does bring benefits, especially after the drought-like conditions of this past summer.
As snow continues to fall, Metro Vancouver's 3 water reservoirs are reaping the benefits.
The snow that's melting off those mountains is pristine, and it flows into our drinking water reservoirs, supplying the region with water. There's around 200 to 300 billion liters of water in the snowpack right now. And part of that this year is the fact that we've got snow right down to sea level, and quite a bit of it, which is quite unusual.
Marshall says the reservoirs provide drinking water for more than 2 million people in BC, so maintaining a steady supply is vital, especially with BC's unpredictable weather.
Last year was an excellent example of how important the snowpack is for us. We had above average snow throughout the entire season. And then, as we all know, the summer and late spring was incredibly hot and dry. But fortunately, we had enough snow to keep the reservoirs relatively full.
That extra snowmelt will also add moisture to the soil in regions impacted by the drought this past summer, leading to new vegetation growth and more protection against natural disasters.
When you drive the Coquihalla and you're driving through the July Mountain Fire, which was that large fire that blew from the summit all the way out toward Coldwater Creek, if that revegetates, it's going to hold the soils in place. It's going to help with the next kind of rainfall event.
But more vegetation like grass means more fuel for fires. Gray says snow will only be helpful if it lingers into the spring.
If we do get one of these anomalous events like a heat dome, which really, really dries things out very, very quickly, then we have problems.
The early arrival of cold weather in BC may also help the province's pine beetle problem.
We would expect that this cold snap would certainly have an impact on bark beetles.
Gray says in the mid-2000s, pine beetles were responsible for wiping out upwards of 20 million hectares of trees in BC, so any cold weather that might help stop their spread is welcome news. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, tomorrow marks 1 day since the riot on Capitol Hill in Washington. A deep dive into what's happened since and what still might come in the ongoing investigation. That's next. And at 6:42, a live look down Georgia Street tonight. Not quite snowy yet, but a big dump coming our way for sure. Johanna breaks it down next. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about all this snow that's expected to come down. So Johanna, it's time to break it down for us.
Yes, let's get to the nitty-gritties of the next 24-hour, Anita, 24 hours, starting with the current temperatures. I think that's really telling our story tonight. It's a battle between the Arctic air and the Pacific milder air, and right now Arctic air is full on holding its ground. -1 at Victoria Airport, -2 at YVR. This is where temperatures will likely stay through the overnight, -10 out towards Hope, where that Arctic air is coming from. Quick look at the radar right now, and it has really yet to get started. We're seeing a few flakes, just hearing a report down in Richmond that it's just beginning to stick. That's going to work its way across Metro Vancouver in the next couple of hours. So just taking you through a bit of a look of timing. Things will remain heavy as far as snowfall through the overnight and into the pre-dawn hours. So waking up to a fresh at least 10 to 15 centimeters on the ground widespread across Metro Vancouver. We'll also see snowfall rates between 2 to 3 centimeters per hour overnight. Mid-morning is when we're going to start to see the transition for some parts of Metro Vancouver. That transition is going to be tough. It's going to come with freezing rain for most of Metro Vancouver as that cold air hangs on close to the ground, and ice accumulations on top of snow. As far as when exactly that changeover to rain will happen, it's a tough forecast for that. By the late afternoon hours, at least, will be 20 to 40 millimeters of rain, and we will see rain through Thursday evening and through all of Friday, so melt will be a big story. But here's a snapshot of where I think we'll be at tomorrow mid-morning. That is 10 to 30 centimeters, and I really think the only place is closer to that 10, right by the water, down towards Richmond, White Rock, South Surrey. Most of Metro Vancouver, 20 plus centimeters, not out of the question. Big snow for the mountains, and of course, big snow for the island, 20 to 40 centimeters, including for the Malahat Highway. Taking you through that timing once again, starting right now. The purple is the snow, heavy as we head into the overnight. Around 7 a.m. is when most of the models begin that changeover, but from experience, I know that Arctic air mass hangs on longer than some of the models predict. So I think there's a chance that we'll see that snow continuing to mid-morning and that freezing rain in the pink lingering a little longer than we'd like. That snow is going to work its way to the southern interior, so big snow for the Okanagan, all the way up to the South Thompson, 15 to 25 centimeters tomorrow. Okay, this is the revised 5-day forecast. The earlier one probably a bit shocking, but this is my forecast date. Friday is going to be rainy and warm. Anita, it looks like we really don't get into a full warm-up until Sunday, and then back to the soggy winter that we know in Vancouver, but a few days to go until then.
Well, Sunday looks good. There's that.
Yes, let's hold on to that.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
The sweeping congressional investigation into what really happened during the January 6th Capitol insurrection in Washington, D.C., and who was responsible continues to inch forward, but support for it remains almost completely divided along party lines. Susan Ormiston examines what it all means for a deeply fractured America, where anger is at an all-time high and trust is dangerously low.
January 6th is seared in America's conscience. The ongoing criminal investigation, one of the largest in U.S. history.
It's not just a stain, it's not just an embarrassment, and we absolutely should not just move on.
In the last year, more than 700 Americans have been arrested from nearly every state. More than 30 have been sentenced to prison so far, with more on the way. Like Jennifer Ryan, who took a private plane from Texas to Washington a year ago and said storming the Capitol was the best day of her life.
Hello, everyone. It's me, Jenna.
Then boasted she'd never go to jail because she's white, blonde, and has a great job. She was wrong. Her 30 days in jail starts this week.
And the only thing that I can see that's good about having to go to prison is that I'm going to be able to work out a lot.
Then there's Paul Hodgkins, a Florida crane operator who got 8 months in jail after pleading guilty to obstruction. Robert Palmer got 5 years, the longest to date, for resisting and assaulting officers. And who could forget Jacob Chansley, the so-called QAnon shaman, beginning 41 months in prison even while admitting he messed up royally. Many Americans would like to think January 6th was a one-off, a horrible, violent day that wouldn't happen again. But Chuck Rosenberg, a former senior FBI official, says the threat is still there.
There are some who think that what happened on January 6th, and I'm one of them, was appalling, repulsive, and there are some who think that what happened on January 6th was insufficient and will continue, I believe, to articulate that Joe Biden is an invalid president, that Donald Trump should be returned.
A new poll taken in late December suggests 62% of Americans now expect violence over the outcome of future presidential elections. Another poll that 34% of Americans believe violence against the government is justified. 1 year on, there's a mound of data on who stormed the Capitol. A research team at the University of Chicago built a profile of those arrested, mostly white, male, and urban.
I thought, like many, that they were coming from the fringe.
Dr. Robert Pape found that while some were members of right-wing extremist groups, most were not.
Over half are business owners, CEOs, or from white-collar occupations, doctors, lawyers, and architects. Only 7% were unemployed at the time they broke into the Capitol. Well, this is completely different than the economic profile of right-wing extremists.
And the motivations that led them to rioting, he says, still circulate.
You might think that arresting hundreds and hundreds of people who are going to serve jail time for breaking into the Capitol would have a chilling effect. This movement is not fading away.
Inside the Capitol, a second intense investigation, a special January 6th committee digging into who conspired and plotted January 6th and what the former president and the White House knew about it.
I remember very clearly the sound of boom, 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 like a battering ram as people tried to barrel their way into the House of Representatives, and members tried to go over to reinforce the wall.
Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin was inside the Capitol that day. His new book, Unthinkable, details the insurrection and, tragically, his own son's suicide just the week before.
And that I really felt no fear for myself because I just kept feeling that we had already lost what was most precious to us in our son, Tommy. The worst thing that ever could happen had already happened. And I was not afraid of these fascist insurrectionists who are trying to tear down our government. I was very angry about it.
Do we have lords and nobles and friends of presidents who don't have to respond to congressional subpoenas or court subpoenas if they don't want to?
Raskin is a key member of the January 6th Special Committee, which has subpoenaed senior people in Donald Trump's circle.
This is how we move on. We move on by telling the truth about the systematic, coordinated attack on American democracy. We're going to tell a riveting, compelling story to the American people about how this attack took place, who paid for it, who organized it, who coordinated it, and what are the changes we need to make in order to defend ourselves in the future.
By nightfall last January 6th, the Capitol was once again under control, but Americans were reeling. Calm has returned here, but still underneath divisive currents magnified 1 year ago. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Washington.
At 6:55, a look at the canals and bridges of Venice, Italy. It's early in the morning and the streets and waters are quiet. Why the city is putting in controls for tourists and how it'll all work next.
Inside a state-of-the-art raptor enclosure at the Cobequid Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, massive eagles swoop overhead. I could feel a breeze on my face, an indication of the power of their wings. I'm told to hug the center wall and stay completely still. Birds of prey don't like humans and tend to fly towards the outside walls. They call this place the Big Geesley, and it's the only one of its kind in Canada. Its oval shape and high ceilings offer continuous flight for the birds, allowing them to build up their flight muscles before being released back into the wild.
We've always thought that we have the skills and the knowledge and how to sort of repair some of the damage that people do to wild animals. I think all these creatures deserve a chance to live the free lives that nature gave them. And if we can right some of those wrongs, that's what our goal is.
The Raptor Flyaway is a cornerstone achievement of the center, which is celebrating 2 decades as a nonprofit organization. The facility has come a long way from its humble beginnings inside Messer's house. He and his late wife, celebrated veterinarian Helene Van Donnick, started caring for wild animals in a small, cramped room.
We would be looking after animals in our spare time because she was a full-time vet. I was working full-time. It was kind of like a mom and pop operation, I guess, to a certain extent.
As word got out about their tiny operation, they started to see more wildlife. And so they decided to expand, erecting buildings outside their home on a quiet rural road. A variety of animals pass through its doors each year, including all birds native to Nova Scotia and small mammals such as skunks, porcupines, and groundhogs. Brenda Boats is the operations wildlife manager and only full-time employee. She noted, "It's a privilege that I've walked through the Big Geesley and peeked inside the nursery. The center is not open to the public."
We strive to rehabilitate, and release, so it's very important to us that we keep the animals wild and have as little exposure to human as possible.
Cobequid was the life's work of Messer's wife, who died in 2018, and it's important for him to build upon her legacy. He described Van Donnick as a dedicated caregiver who advocated for the wildlife in this province and poured her heart and soul into building the center.
It was one of the promises that we made to Helene, when she was ill and realized that she was not going to be around, that this would continue.
One day, Messer would like to retire and pass the center on to new hands. Looking back over the last 2 decades, he has a hard time appreciating all they've accomplished.
To leave this behind as a legacy is quite an accomplishment, and I'm very proud of it. And I'm sure Helene would say the same thing, that she was very proud.
Ali Thompson, CBC News, Hilden.
Venice is about to become a very exclusive tourist destination. The famous city of canals is going to start charging an admission fee. The city is trying to limit the number of day tourists and encourage longer stays. As many as 80,000 people a day visit the city, causing congestion on the streets and in the water. Admission will be about €5 or $7 Canadian for a one-day pass. Visitors will have to book in advance, and residents, their families, and people staying in local hotels are exempt. Police will be able to monitor the crowds using a network of cameras, and visitors will be identified using cell phone data. The measures are not pandemic related. Well, I do await the day that we can all travel again and perhaps get that tourist pass in Venice. Thanks so much for being with us. That is our show for tonight, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.